Bluegrass, we're inspired by you. Full of hope, full of purpose, rising, moving forward together. And the days ahead are bright. The enhancement and well-being of our community, transforming lives through mental health, intellectual and developmental disability, and substance use services. Bluegrass.org is becoming New Vista, because with every sunrise, we reflect upon something greater. We see the good ahead. New Vista.
Okay, great. Well, it's great to be here today to talk about the 5 stages and the recovery process. I wanted to kind of give you an outline in my presentation, what we're going to go through, so you know what's to come, what we're going to take a look at in the next 50 minutes or so. And if people want to interact and share their experience as well, I'm going to share my experience in this a little bit. And if people want to share their experience, that's great. If you'd rather not, that's okay too. So first, I would like to say the 5 stages in the recovery process is according to the Appalachian Consulting Group. This is their material. It's online. If you Google it, you can get it online, and it's really great material, but the credit does go to the Appalachian Consulting Group. So when we go through each stage of the recovery process, I'm going to share a quote to that specific stage. I'm going to define that stage according to the Appalachian Consulting Group. We're going to talk about the danger of that stage, and then the role of services. And the services could be peer support, specialist services. And then I'm going to share my personal experience with that stage, because I'm a person with a lived experience of having a serious mental illness. I'm an adult peer support specialist, and I currently work at the Bridgehaven Center for Peer Excellence. And then if others would like to share their experience with that stage, they're welcome to. If they'd like to take a pass, that's okay too. And then we're going to take a look at some SAMHSA information. And SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They're a federal agency located in Washington, D.C. And we're going to look at the SAMHSA definition of recovery. We're going to look at the SAMHSA 4 major dimensions that support a life in recovery. And we're going to look at the 10 guiding principles of recovery according to SAMHSA. And it's really, I included the 10 guiding principles of recovery according to SAMHSA because I really thought it was important to connect the 5 stages of recovery along with the 10 guiding principles of recovery. So these are principles that you can connect with, that can help guide you, help direct you, and help you through the 5 stages of mental health recovery. So the first stage is impact of the illness. And the quote is the shattering of one's world, hopes, and dreams. And there are times when the person is overwhelmed by the disabling power of the illness. The impact of the illness is the dominant experience in a person's life, and the person is having difficulty functioning. The danger is that the person will redefine his or her identity in mental illness terminology that will automatically limit his or her future. And the role of services is to decrease the emotional distress by reducing the symptoms and communicating there is life after a diagnosis. So I can really relate to this first stage, the shattering of one's world, hopes, and dreams, because for about 6 years after I first started experiencing mental health symptoms, I really struggled. I really struggled for 6 years, not 6 months, but 6 years. And I experienced symptoms such as paranoia, psychosis, delusions. I was hospitalized 5 times. I didn't understand on those hospitalizations, sometimes when I'd start a medication, that I needed to continue taking medication. For me, I thought mental illness was like a cold. Once you get well, you can stop taking your mental health medication. So I can relate to the quote, the shattering of one's world, hopes, and dreams, and being overwhelmed by the disabling power of the illness and having difficulty functioning, because I really struggled for 6 years. And until I got with the program. And I'll tell you about that in the stage as we go further. But Would anybody else like to share when they felt they were overwhelmed by the disabling power of the illness or having difficulty functioning? Okay, well, let's go on to the, yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
When I was a teenager, I was hospitalized as well. My teenage years were pretty, overwhelming, and I didn't feel like I could function properly, things like that. Which kind of helped, going into adulthood and things like that, managing my mental illness and things like that.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And I think since we're on Zoom, you wanted me to repeat what she said. Would that be great? So that when you were a teenager, you were hospitalized and having difficulty functioning at that time. Yes, I can certainly relate to that. Thank you for sharing that.
I think at this stage it's important too for people to know that treatment, is part of your recovery. So this may be the stage that you're hospitalized, and understanding how important that is to work towards your own recovery.
That's a very good point. That's a very, getting connected to treatment. And right, because I needed all those 5 hospitalizations. And it took me a while to learn what I needed to do to stay well, but all those 5 hospitalizations helped me. I needed to be in the hospital. And that's a very good point. Thank you. Okay, so that's the first stage in the process of recovery, impact of the illness. The second stage in the process of recovery is life is limited. And the quote is, we both gave up. Giving up was a solution. There are times when the person has given into the disabling power of the illness. He or she doesn't like the way his life is, but believes that this is the best he will ever be. He or she is not ready or able to make a commitment to change. The danger is that the person will have identified so strongly with the negative stigma of the illness that they cannot see any possibility. And the role of services such as peer support services is to instill hope, a sense of possibility, and to rebuild a positive self-image by helping the person review and evaluate his options. So I can relate to this stage too. I think I felt that life was limited, and thinking about giving up, the time that was going on in my life was I was at a hospitalization, and I was refusing medication to treat my illness. I was actually afraid the medication could harm me. My diagnosis is schizoaffective disorder. And back at this time, it was schizophrenia, but then it changed to schizoaffective disorder with a psychiatrist that I met several years after I was first diagnosed. But I was at this hospitalization, and I was refusing medication to treat my illness. And my psychiatrist did the exact right thing. He said, Debbie, if you don't take this medication, I'm going to transfer you to the state hospital. And at the state hospital, they have a court, and you can appear before the judge, and this judge can make you take the medication. And I thought, well, if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. And I do appreciate this psychiatrist doing this. He did do the absolute right thing, because he knew I wasn't going to get better until I got on medication. And he was absolutely correct. So I went out to the state hospital, and I was there for 2 weeks. I appeared before the judge, and I guess the judge didn't think I was a threat to myself or anybody else, or too sick to care for myself. So after being there for 2 weeks, he said I could go home. So my brother came and picked me up and took me home. And I stayed, that was February of 2000. And I stayed there for about 3 months until my last hospitalization, which was in May of 2000. But during that time, I was thinking about giving up, because I was afraid people wanted to harm me, and I was afraid I was going to be harmed, and I was thinking about giving up. But I'm a Christian, and I was thinking, because with my paranoia, I was afraid someone was going to break in and take me away to a death in which I would suffer and be tortured. but I'm a Christian. And one night where I was thinking, gee, you know, I am not brave enough to face this terrible death that I thought was coming for me. And I did consider taking my life, but I'm a Christian, and I problem solved it by thinking WWJD, for what would Jesus do? So if it's 10 o'clock at night and you think people are going to come take you away to a terrible death, I thought, well, what would Jesus do? And what did Jesus do? And I thought, well, he waited and faced the consequences. So that's what I decided to do. And it's a very good thing, because I was never in any danger of being taken away to a terrible death where I would suffer and be tortured. Would anybody else like to share a time where they had given in to the disabling power of the illness?
So I'm more on the clinician side, but this part of the training, the peer training and all that is my favorite. So if I say, when I think about this stage, the life is limited and they believe that this is the best that it's gonna get. Like a lot of times people get stuck there because if they try to move on and there's any risk or barriers, they fall right back into this is as good as my life's gonna be. And I hear it from the folks that I work with, you know, their substance use role too. It's like, well, why even try to do anything different? It's not gonna be any better. And so, you know, like you were talking about, sometimes you just kind of want to give up and not and think, okay, this is it. This is what I'm destined for. And really, you know, there is that hope that people can recover. So.
Right. Thank you for sharing
Sorry,
that.
I interject, but I love this part of the training. I told my staff, I'm like, I'm trying to be quiet, but I can't. It's hard.
Right. Right. Because this is only the second stage in the process of recovery, and it gets better,
A lot
right?
of people, but a lot of people go back to this because it's what they're comfortable with.
Right.
You know, when there's pictures that go along with it, and this one's a person sitting there watching TV, and I think this is it for me. Like, this doesn't get any better, but being at home, but like you said, you're a prime example of the process, so.
Well, I just came in from the hospital. Suicide. I thought, you know, even after been out of the hospital, I felt like, you know, such a failure. This far, all the way back down. I had to get out of my comfort zone. Move away again, or you know, it's one of the best things I've ever done.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, that you've had times where you've given into the disabling power of the illness and just had to keep working at it. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so far we've talked about the 5 stages of the recovery process, and the first stage is impact of the illness, the shattering of one's world, hopes and dreams. And the second stage is life is limited, where we both gave up. Giving up was a solution. And the third stage is change is possible. And the quote is, the fragile flame of hope and courage. So this is where hope comes in, and I just love it. There are times when the person is questioning the disabling power of the illness. She believes that there may be more to life than she is currently experiencing, and is beginning to believe that her life can be different. The danger is that she will be afraid to take the necessary risks or be discouraged to do so and remain in the life is limited stage. And the role of services such as peer support services is to help her see that she is not so limited by the illness, and in order to move on, she will need to take some risks. So I can really relate to this stage as well. Change is possible. And this stage in my mental health recovery came about through my mom. My mom, when I got sick, got connected to NAMI, and she met someone there that she connected with, and my mom shared with her how sick I was and symptoms that I was experiencing, like paranoia and psychosis and delusions. And this woman told my mom, Debbie is gonna be okay. And that just gave my mom so much hope. And so when I got out of the hospital and got a little stable, my mom said, I want you to meet this lady. I've set up a lunch meeting at a local restaurant in our town. You've got to meet her. And at this time, I was out of the hospital, and I was looking back at times when I was sick. And I have to tell you, I was filled with shame and embarrassment. I was humiliated by all my delusions, my psychosis. I was aware how my thinking was off. And I walked into the restaurant, and the three of us sat down at a table, and this woman shared with me, I think her name was Kyle. I tried to look her up, but I can't find her. And I lost my mom almost 5 years ago, so I can't ask my mom who she was. But she came and sat down, and she was smiling, and she was happy, and she told me that she was married and she had children, and she was involved in NAMI, and she shared with me that she had bipolar disorder and was in recovery. And I remember just being overwhelmed that she had a serious mental illness, but it was very clear that she had recovered and she had a great life. And this is something that I had not processed before. I was thinking my future was doom and gloom, and all the hopes that I had when I was in college were out the door. But by meeting her, I started to question my future of doom and gloom. And I started thinking things like, wow, maybe if she could recover, maybe I could too. And I remember she walked out of the restaurant first, and my mom and I walked out together afterwards, and she drove by in her van, hanging out the window, waving to me. And that's the last I ever saw this lady, but she made a profound impact on me. And she really gave me that fragile flame of hope and courage. And that's an interaction with another peer, someone with the lived experience of having a serious mental illness that had recovered, really made a tremendous impact on me. And I started picturing my future as well, maybe I could have a bright future too. Maybe I could get married. Maybe I could be involved in the community. Maybe I could get back to work. Maybe I could have all the hopes and dreams that I had when I was in college. So would anyone else like to share what gave them hope and courage in their recovery? Sure.
I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 1994. And within 2 weeks, I think, of that doctor visit, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance organized in my town. And they're dedicated to depressive illness. And there was a collection of maybe 50 people in a room from all stages of incapacitation to recovery. And that's the same experience I had. Wow, there are people that have gotten better, who can recover from it. And it seems like what your mom and this miracle worker lady just did was organize a support group for you.
Right.
Anybody can do it.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so glad you found that group of other peers that you could connect with and see
And I've
others.
been associated with it for 25 years.
Oh, that's great. Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, it helps.
Yes, it did. Yes.
I have some
Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you found hope too. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
So in the chat, it was, I think knowing that what I was feeling was not awful is what helped me. And, you know, when they took the stigma away, so when others are sure that it's not this horrible thing. And I think personally myself, you know, what gave me hope is, you know, finding out that, you know, I deal with, you know, intrusive thoughts and other things. I have OCD, and, you know, knowing that my brain's not the only brain that does that, and just finding other people and knowing that I'm not alone, you know, was what gave me hope. Because, you know, there's this person who's 10 years older than me. It's like, well, I know I can make it another 10 years. Let's see what we can do. You know, that kind of a thing.
Right, right. And I heard someone at the NAMI conference talk about stigma busters, and I love that NAMI phrase, stigma busters, because there should be no stigma against mental health, right? It's an illness and it can be treated with medication. What I used to think is some people have a heart attack, other people have a brain attack. I kind of feel like I had a brain attack, a chemical imbalance in my brain, and the antipsychotic medication that I take every day corrects that chemical imbalance in my brain that helps me to think clearly and process information clearly. Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. So far we've talked about the first stage in the recovery process, the impact of the illness, the shattering of one's world, hopes and dreams. We've talked about the life is limited stage where we both gave up, and giving up was a solution. And then change is possible, the fragile flame of hope and courage. The fourth stage in the process of recovery is commitment to change. And the quote is, I began in little ways with small triumphs and simple acts of courage. There are times when the person is challenging the disabling power of the illness. He believes that there are some possibilities, but he or she is not sure what they are. They're willing to explore what it will take to make some changes. The danger is that they will not get the skills, resources, and supports that they need to do what they want to do and become frustrated and give up. And the role of services such as peer support services is to help the person take the initial steps by helping him to identify his strengths and needs in terms of skills, resources, and supports. So this stage for me was really my last hospitalization, which was in May of 2000. I'm really fortunate that I had a family that didn't give up on me. And one night I was at my brother's house and I was very sick and I was paranoid, psychotic, and delusional. And someone that I had met at a mall that I confronted that I thought was following me threw me into a glass window at a coffee shop and pinched a nerve. And I had sharp shooting pains going in my face because it caused trigeminal neuralgia, which a chiropractor ended up fixing. But I just hit rock bottom. I was at rock bottom. And my brother Will said, Debbie, if I take you to the hospital, will you take the medicine? And I said, yes, Will, if you take me to the hospital right now, I will take the medication. So he put me in his truck and drove me down to a hospital in my neighborhood, about a 45-minute drive, marched me up to the psychiatric unit. And I said, Will, I changed my mind. I'm not going to do this. And he said, oh, yes, you are, Debbie. you're getting hospitalized tonight. They told us we had to go to the emergency room. He's like, you're doing this, you're getting this done now. This is happening. You're not changing your mind. So I said, okay. I love my brother. So I went to the ER and got checked into the psychiatric unit, and they sat me down at a table with all this paperwork, and I just signed everything they gave me. I just thought I had hit rock bottom and I knew it had to get better. And my brother wanted me to go to the hospital, and I love my brother, so I felt like this was a good decision. So the next day I got a shot of an antipsychotic medication that slowly releases in your system over 30 days. And after a couple of weeks, I was discharged. And then after being at home for 2 weeks, I started coming out of the delusional thinking, because I was watching C-SPAN a lot, and I thought people were on C-SPAN were giving me messages. This was back in 2000. So if I'd see President Clinton giving the thumbs up, I thought he was trying to communicate to me. And I remember after I'd been on this medication for about a month, I was sitting there watching C-SPAN, and I thought, hey, I think this is just C-SPAN. I don't think anyone's trying to communicate to me through C-SPAN. And I think I'd be safe enough to leave my house. I wouldn't get shot, and I can drive over to my brother's house. I think I could do that without getting shot, because I was afraid to leave the house at this time. People were bringing me groceries because I was afraid I'd be harmed. And I drove over to my brother's house, and I realized that my brother was not protecting me from this terrible danger that I was in, but he was just my brother and a husband, and his 3 kids were there for his attention. His wife was there for his attention, and then I showed up. And so I came out of the delusional, my last hospitalization was May of 2000. I came out of the delusional thinking in June. And in July, I got a job with an inside sales with a large telecommunications company. And I had my headset, I had my little cubicle in my booth. I was answering phones. I had a full-time job Monday through Friday with health insurance. And I just kept going to the hospital once a month, the outpatient section of a hospital, to get that shot of the antipsychotic medication. And then after about 4 months of being on that antipsychotic medication, I switched to the pill form of that medication, which I still take today in the pill form. So that's how I really began in little ways with small triumphs and simple acts of courage, and started to challenge the disabling power of the illness, and started to see that there were some possibilities. Because for my recovery, I really wanted to get back to work. I had a home, I wanted to keep my home, I wanted to pay my bills, I wanted to remain independent. And I knew to do all that, I had to get back to work. I had to get a job. And so that's how I started to challenge the disabling power of the illness. Would anyone else like to share how they started to challenge the disabling power of the illness? Okay, let's move on to the 5th stage. So far we've talked about the 5 stages of the recovery process, the impact of the illness. When you feel that life is limited, you start to see that change is possible. You make a commitment to change. And the 5th stage in the recovery process is actions for change. And the quote is, we rebuilt our lives on 3 cornerstones of recovery: hope, willingness, and responsible action. There are times when the person is moving beyond the disabling power of the illness. He or she knows the direction that she wants to go, but is not sure that she can do it. Yet she is willing to begin to take more responsibility for her life. The danger is that she will begin to doubt her ability to function on her own and take responsibility for her actions. And the role of services such as peer support services is to equip her with the necessary skills, resources, and supports so she can trust in her own decision-making ability and take more responsibility for her life. So this stage in the recovery process for me is when I really learned what I need to do to stay well. And for example, for me, some of the things that I need to do to stay well is take my antipsychotic medication every day. And I take it when I get home from work. And this is May of 2022. And I started this medication in May of 2000. So I've been on this medication for 22 years. There was one time for about 3 months that I switched to another medication because I was afraid of developing the side effect of tardive dyskinesia, and my psychiatrist approved it, but I got sick on that medication. So I went back to the antipsychotic medication that I've been on now for 22 years. So I've been on that medication except for about 3 months for 22 years, and it works really great for me. It controls all my symptoms. So some of the things that I learned what I need to do to stay well is I take my medication every day. I report my thoughts to my support team, which include my family, my brothers, my cousin, my husband, my psychiatric nurse practitioner. I try to get enough sleep. Exercise is important for me. I love walking. That's one of my favorite exercises. I try to eat right. Work is really helpful to me. I work at Bridgehaven Mental Health Services. Before that, I worked in Illinois in mental health. So I've been working in mental health for about 15 years. But working really helps me tremendously because it offers so many benefits for me, such as structure, routine, and social interaction, a chance to feel good about myself because I really needed to rebuild my self-confidence and self-esteem because when I first got out of the hospital, my self-confidence and self-esteem were in the tank. Work also helps me with health insurance, a paycheck. I have a sense of accomplishment that I'm accomplishing things. Another thing that I've had to learn that I have to do to stay well is I cannot drink any alcohol, not even socially. And I learned that the hard way. Because if I even had 1 or 2 glasses of red wine a week with my husband, I would start experiencing symptoms. And then I thought, well, I can try the no alcohol wine. I can have the wine where there's no alcohol in it, but there's still a little bit of alcohol in it. And I realized that I'll start having symptoms even if I drink the alcohol-free wine. So I just can't, I have had to cut it off. It's over. And that's fine because there are other great beverages like Diet 7-Up, Sprite Zero, Canada Dry. I've learned there are other beverages. I don't need alcohol. It's not worth it. It's not worth it because in my case, it makes my medication not work. So it's like I'm not even taking my medication and I'm gonna have symptoms. And I, as I said, I've learned that the hard way. Would anyone else like to share where there are times when they've moved beyond the illness? Okay.
I will.
Okay, sure.
This thing come up on you.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So my first mental illness diagnosis was when I was 13. Diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And then I was diagnosed when I was 23 with bipolar 2 disorder. And just learning to live with those diagnoses and flourishing. You know, I work as a peer support specialist now with New Vista, and I'm in my 30s, and it's the best thing that has ever happened, regardless of what I've been diagnosed with.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I used to work, the company I worked for in Illinois, it was a psychiatric rehabilitation center. And for a while they changed their logo, but for a while their logo, it was on all their letterhead, on all their business cards, on their website. Their logo was Bright Futures for People with Mental Illness. And I just was so proud of that logo. Here's my card. As we learn and people get educated, treatment works. People can and do recover. And as NAMI says, recovery is not only possible, but it's probable. So thank you for sharing that. And so this is a just picture of how the stages go from the impact of the illness to life is limited, change is possible, commitment to change, and actions moving beyond. And again, this is from the Appalachian Consulting Group. And according to the Appalachian Consulting Group, recovery is the process of gaining control over one's life and the direction one wants that life to go on the other side of a psychiatric diagnosis. And hope is the belief that one has both the ability and the opportunity to engage in the recovery process. So now we're going to talk about the SAMHSA 10 guiding principles of recovery. And again, this is a federal agency. It's a Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. I have some SAMHSA information here. So the working definition of recovery from mental disorders and or substance use disorders, according to SAMHSA, is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And through the Recovery Support Strategic Initiative, SAMHSA has 4 major dimensions that support a life in recovery. And the 4 major dimensions are health, home, purpose, and community. And health, they say overcoming or managing one's disease or symptoms. For example, abstaining from the use of alcohol, illicit drugs, non-prescribed medications, if one has an addiction problem. And for everyone in recovery, making informed, healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. Home, a stable and safe place to live, and purpose, having meaningful day activities, whether it's a job, school, volunteering, family, caretaking, and community, relationships, and social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. So here are the 10 guiding principles of recovery that I think it's important to use to help guide you through the 5 stages in the process of recovery, help guide you, help direct you, and help move you through those stages. So the 10 guiding principles of recovery, according to SAMHSA, are hope, person-driven, many pathways, holistic, peer support, relational, culture, addresses trauma, strengths and responsibility, and respect. So let's look at hope first. Recovery emerges from hope. And the belief that recovery is real provides the essential and motivating message for a better future, that people can and do overcome the internal and external challenges, barriers, and obstacles that confront them. Hope is internalized and can be fostered by peers, families, providers, allies, and others. Hope is the catalyst of the recovery process. And again, hope for me came from that peer that really made a strong impact on me to show me that she could recover. And since she could recover, I thought, well, maybe I can too. And I also got involved with the NAMI in Illinois, and I'd walk into my local NAMI chapter, and I just felt so welcome there. And I felt so connected to other people that had a serious mental illness that had recovered. I saw family members of people with a serious mental illness. I was always greeted. I was always welcomed. And I started identifying other people, and 2 of my other friends that had schizophrenia. Once I was walking downtown, my little local town, and I saw my 2 friends with schizophrenia outside the Starbucks drinking an iced tea. And I was just like, hi guys, how are you doing? Now, no one else knew that they had schizophrenia except me, but I knew. And it was just so nice to be welcomed into that community where I knew, you know, because there is stigma out there. I think it's getting better because I think education's getting better and people are realizing the treatment works and people can and do recover, and people with a serious mental illness really do contribute to the community. But we all know that sometimes there are movies out there that portray people with mental illness as negative people and people that you should be, you know, afraid of. And so I just thought that was so neat, seeing my friends drinking some iced tea outside the Starbucks. So the next guiding principle, let's see, we have this, I don't know how to get rid of that set up professionals audio systems, but
I mean, we're gonna have to ignore it.
yeah, I don't see a little X to get rid of it. Okay. Okay, well, recovery is person driven. Recovery is person driven. And for me, you know, self-determination and self-direction are the foundations of recovery, and individuals can define their own life goals and their own unique path. For me, getting back to work was really important, but for someone else, volunteering might be really important. And I know at Bridgehaven, we have art therapy, we have gardening therapy, we have music therapy, there's exercise classes, we have pet therapy if people wanted to get connected. I love our pet therapy animals. So recovery is person driven, and people can design their own unique path on how they want to build on their strengths and gain and regain control of their lives. The next stage, the next guiding principle of recovery, according to SAMHSA, is recovery occurs via many pathways. And I think it's important to note, they mention in here that recovery is non-linear, right? Sometimes you can have setbacks. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes it's 1 step forward and 2 steps back, but you keep working. I have relapsed. I've had symptoms, but I try to catch it. I haven't had to go to the hospital in about 22 years, but I think it's important to know that recovery is non-linear, and sometimes we can have setbacks. And what I just try to do is I try to learn, okay, what happened here? What threw me off the rails? And I've learned, a couple of years ago, I had to increase my medication a little bit more, and I had to stop drinking any alcohol socially. So I've made those 2 changes, and that has really worked really well to help me keep stable. So I think for me, what I try to do if I do have a setback, I just try to really think about it, get some feedback, examine it, and see what can I do? What can I do to help me stay stable? The next guiding principle of recovery, according to SAMHSA, is recovery is holistic. And I think, you know, we have to be concerned not only about our mental health, but our physical health, about housing, spiritual health, social networks, community participation. So it's recovery encompasses an individual's whole life, including mind, body, and spirit, and community. And I know my faith is very important to me, because when I was sick, I really felt like my faith helped me get through some of those dark days, because there were a lot of dark days. Is there anything anybody would like to comment on that, about how recovery encompasses an individual's whole life, including mind, body, spirit, and community?
I think that's a really awesome thing. Want it all. For me, sometimes it's just baby steps. Sometimes for me, it's just all the encompass of it all.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I agree. Sometimes we need to take baby steps. Sometimes it's one day at a time, right? Right. Thank you. Yes.
For me, a lot of my mental health goes back to my physical health. And it play off with another. I'm not taking care of myself physically, then it will affect me mentally and not in a good positive way. So I have to really make sure that I'm not just doing this one thing or recovery, but you're doing all of it all the time and not, putting one thing over another because it will just.
Right, I agree. I feel the same way. Thank you for sharing that. The next guiding principle of recovery. So let's go over what we've covered so far, the guiding principles of recovery by SAMHSA. So we've talked about recovery emerges from hope. We've talked about recovery as person-driven. Recovery occurs via many pathways. Recovery is holistic. And the next guiding principle of recovery, according to SAMHSA, is recovery is supported by peers and allies. And I've shared a little bit about how peers have really impacted me, and I still love working as an adult peer support specialist, and I love being at this conference because I'm connected with Kentucky peers right now. And peer support is very important for me. I love working in this field and being connected to this community. And then they mentioned in allies. So there are some professions that I'm connected with in my mental health that may not be peers, but they're also still extremely helpful. For example, I have a psychiatric nurse practitioner that I see for medication management. I've had therapists in the past that I'm not aware of if they have a mental illness or not. I know some of them have shared that with me, because people oftentimes that have a mental illness really like to work in this field because it's very rewarding and it's a great community to be connected in. The next guiding principle of SAMHSA is recovery is supported through relationships and social networks. An important factor in the recovery process is the presence and involvement of people who believe in the person's ability to recover. So I think people that I'm connected with that really feel that I can recover are my family, my friends, my mental health providers, whether it's psychiatric or physical health, faith groups, members of the community. It's important to have that support. And the next stage, the next guiding principle of recovery is culturally based and influenced. Culture and cultural background and all of its diverse representations, including values, traditions, and beliefs, are keys in determining a person's journey and unique pathway to recover. Next guiding principle is recovery is supported by addressing trauma. The experience of trauma, such as physical or sexual abuse, domestic violence, war, disaster, and others, is often a precursor to or associated with alcohol and drug use, mental health problems, and related issues. And recovery involves individuals, family, and community strengths, and responsibility is the next principle according to SAMHSA. And I think with this comes in personal responsibility, doing what I need to do to stay well, and also having communities be connected with people with a serious mental illness. I was an IPS employment specialist in Illinois I worked as an employment specialist for 9 years, and I worked as an IPS trainer for 4 years. And I always loved one of my favorite things about the job was going out into the community and job developing and connecting with employers that wanted to hire clients that I was working with. And I met so many employers that wanted to hire people with a serious mental illness and told me how they value diversity in their workforce. And they said, bring me somebody. And if somebody left and moved on, they'd say, bring me somebody else, because a lot of employers really value diversity, and their diversity wants to include people with a serious mental illness. And the last guiding principle of recovery, according to SAMHSA, is recovery is based on respect. And for me, I had to rebuild my respect for myself, because after I got out of the hospital and looked back at times when I was sick, as I said, I had a lot of shame and embarrassment, and getting back to work really helped me rebuild my self-confidence and self-esteem. And bring back respect for myself. And that's me, Debbie Holman. I work for the Bridgehaven Center for Peer Excellence. I think we're about out of time. Does anybody have any closing comments or questions they would like to ask?
Mention on the 5 stages of the recovery process, if you have that from undertaking certification training. But a good thing, a resource that we use it for is if you're struggling when you're working with someone, if you see what stage and you can identify what stage they're in, it will tell you like how you can support them. Because sometimes we get caught up where people are at and don't know how to support them anymore. And so that could be a useful tool to be able to help someone and meet them where they're at.
That's a very good point. If you can identify what stage they're in, then you'll know what the role of services should be. That's a very good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Thank you for your transparency.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's take out this thumb drive. You want me to hand you the laptop? I'll let you pull up the thumb drive.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.